Alright, so we'll go ahead and get started. Obviously, we're going to be talking about MLA and APA. Now, obviously, I would imagine that you people, will be a little bit more interested in the APA because your classes are a little bit more geared towards that. So when we cover the, the MLA, I mean, we can go a little faster through that if we need to. And so my first question, before we actually get started really covering the material is, what is your first impression so far of APA? Okay, you hate it. Okay, so that's the first impression right there, you hate it. What are your first impressions? Because you probably already have done at least a little bit of it so far.
It's professional.
Okay. Okay. And I will tell you, from experience, there are so many different ones out there. I mean, APA is just simply one of them. Of course, the MLA, there's Chicago style, Travian, which is almost identical to Chicago style. It can get confusing at times, as you're working on that. And there are so many rules that, to different types of ways that you can cite certain things. The rules change all the time because they'll update new editions, and so they may modify just one little thing, from an old book. And so trying to keep up with all that, can be confusing. And one of the things that I have learned from my own experience is that professors sometimes want you to do it slightly different than what the book is telling you to do it. Now, you may ask, why do they do that? Now, I've got my own theories. And so a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, is that they've learned it because maybe they were in school 10 years ago. And so they know how to do it 10 years ago, that specific way. And so a lot of times they don't want to change with, the new editions. So they're still having you do it the way that they learned how to do it. Like for example, a lot of the internet, citations that you do now, especially like MLA and even APA, a lot of times they don't require, for certain ones, to have you have the long link, the web link, the really long version of that link. Some do, some don't, but they're starting to move away from that a little bit, especially, MLA. Well, professors still want you to put it. So the book will tell you don't have to do it, but yet the professor will say, yes, I want you to put that there. So I always say, whatever we cover today, if I'm telling you to do it one way, but your professor tells you to do it something different, you always do it their way. Because at the end of the day, they're putting a grade on that paper. And so, there's papers that I had to change, because, the book told me one way, but my professor told me to do it the other. I didn't like doing it that way because I just thought the book is telling me to do this. I need to do it this way. But I always will side with the professor because at the end of the day, they put that grade on that paper. And so you always want to be geared towards getting the best possible grade. So I'd always just like to make that special note there, because, why are we writing these papers? I mean, I don't think we're doing it for fun. We know that we want to pass that class, we want to get a good grade, and so always do what they say, at the end of the day. So things that we will cover, we're going to talk about, APA, style. We'll spend quite a bit of time looking at like in-text citations. Some professors call them parenthetical notations. But basically, it's when you are writing your paper and you're citing inside of your paper, that normally goes towards the very end of that sentence. That's what we're going to be talking about, what you put in parentheses. So that's the in-text citation. And then, of course, we'll also look at the reference page. And I will tell you that there are subtle differences between APA and MLA. The reason why I like to mention, MLA is because many students have probably used MLA. It's probably one of the first things they probably have used in the past for like the English composition classes. And so I like, looking at that because you kind of know that. And so I can show you the differences between MLA and APA. So you can really start to see why why they're different. And once you know why they're different, they'll start to make more sense. At least in my opinion. So, and then of course we'll look at additional resources. So that's where I'm going to show you places that you can go and actually get a little bit of help along the way, and where you should go get your sources at. Because I do think you want to be careful and be very selective when you're choosing your sources. One of the things that I used to always tell students to do is do your reference page first. Before you even start your paper, find your resources, do your reference page, cite all your sources like you're supposed to, because it just makes your job easier when you have to go back and start doing those, the in-text citations. And it gives you a chance to really kind of discover, if you have good sources or not. And if you're having issues with how to cite things, a lot of times I avoided the ones that I thought were complicated. I thought, this is way too complicated to cite, I'm not messing with it, I can find something else. And so I'd create that reference page, I'd be happy with that, and then I'd start writing my paper, and then I'd start inserting my in-text citations. And it just made my life a little bit easier. So hopefully you may start switching over to that. So what is, APA? I mean, most of us, kind of have, a little bit, of an idea of what it is. I mean, it is, American Psychological Association. The fields that it primarily focuses in on is, social sciences, like, psychology, linguistics, sociology, economics, business, nursing, especially social work, that kind of ties in, the social sciences. Social work is, heavily APA. I mean, and you write a lot. I mean, you're already figuring that out, It may not be an enormous amount, like big, gigantic papers right now, but you do write almost every week about, and I will say the papers eventually get longer. So 2 pages is nice right now. I mean, you will write longer papers, and some you kind of piecemeal it out. So you'll write 2 pages, then you'll write another, and eventually you'll combine some of these papers. I know there's some classes that do that, and so but at some point you'll be writing 5, 6, 7 page papers pretty steady. But the citation part, well, hopefully later on will be the easier part. Right now it doesn't seem that way. And so now, Socorro, I know that you have to use APA. Have you had write a lot of papers for this coming up semester? I mean, is there going to be quite a few?
Coming up semester.
Okay.
That's what I'm here.
Okay. So, and one thing I will say, we're not going to be able to cover every single thing about APA. So I always tell students, if you're not sure, come to my office. We can sit down. We can schedule, block out, some time where we can sit there and take the time to look at your paper, look at your sources. I'm more than happy to even help you kind of go find some of those sources and look for places, and really make sure that we understand it. Because, I mean, you're getting a snapshot, of APA. The only way to actually get good at it is to practice. The more papers you write, the better you're going to get at it. But it does take a little bit of time. I always look at students who, start like the social work program and other programs that, their first semester or two, how stressed they are and how kind of overwhelmed they are with the papers. But normally towards the very end, they're just knocking those papers out, that they've got it down, by then. So it will get, easier in time, but it does require a little bit of practice. And so let's go ahead and just kind of dive into it, a little bit. So this is an example of the cover page. So this is something that if you're using MLA, you're not used to this. MLA is completely different when it comes to the cover page. MLA, you actually have all the stuff on the exact paper where you're writing your content as well. APA, you will use a cover page, and there are specific things that they are looking for. And so obviously, you have the title page, then you'll eventually have the abstract, the body, main body, and then references. So that's the components of your paper. Now I will tell you, some professors don't always require you to have an abstract. Some do, some don't. But if you do, you normally need to keep it around 150 to 200 words. That's because a lot of students struggle with how long they should have to write their abstract.
That's just like an overview of the paper.
Yep, it is. Yeah, it's an overview of the paper, kind of a snapshot, the highlights of what you're going to focus in on. So that's why that abstract's important, because it allows the reader to kind of get a preview of what they're going to be reading about. And so when you are looking online for journals and reading those, a lot of times they'll have abstracts on there. And that kind of can give you an idea of whether or not this is a good paper to read by reading that abstract. So the abstract is good, but I will tell you, a lot of professors don't require that when you're just writing one of your papers. Now, if you're writing a really long paper, yeah, you're probably going to have the abstract. Now, how many of you have actually used and created an abstract? So not yet. Okay, so most of the time you won't. And so, and then of course, the title page, I see a lot of students struggle with that because they're just not sure how to get started. And have any of you encountered that so far, where you've struggled to kind of like, where do I need to have things located at, in the title page?
Kind of sort of, because sometimes our professor switches it up, like
Yeah.
one professor wants us to have our title, and then our name, then our class, then
Yeah.
our subject, and then the class. The other professors want the title, then our name, and then where you go to school.
Yeah.
Like, they just want them in a different order sometimes. It's like,
Yeah, one of the things that I used to always do is when I'd always work on my papers early. So I'd work on them early, and I would always go during their office hours when I felt like my papers was in a good spot. And I would just say, you know what, I don't expect you to read all this thoroughly. I just want to kind of make sure that my structure looks okay to you. And normally they would do that. They would look at, my cover page, and they give me any suggestions. A lot of professors will actually give you examples. I mean, they'll print off stuff and give it, to you, towards the beginning of the semester, kind of what they're looking for in the paper. So I'd always go off of that. But basically the theme that you want to look for with the cover page is, for APA, the running head. You have to have that. Me looking at that, I know that this is APA. So that's one of the clues that I can tell that this is, for APA, because it has that running head, which has, the title there. And so that is a signal that it's APA. And so, now how many of you have had to put that in there yet?
Yeah, they use us like an inch, but when I was printing off my papers, like the inch, it don't look like everybody else's. So I don't know if I'm doing it wrong when I put it in a little more.
Okay, so one question I have for you, do you type it in there manually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when I try to do like title, it'll like do that, and then it won't give me the number part. So then I do the number part, and then it gets rid of the
Yeah.
running header. I'm like,
Yeah.
That's what mine did. So I do it manually.
Yeah.
And when I did, my other two professors was like, that's fine. The Jeremy was like,
I'm saying,
it looks like your heading is not, I'm like, really, Jeremy? Everybody said it's fine. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, you're supposed to do it using that. There's a header footer, and you're supposed to go in there and with the header, and you end up you type in the header first, this, and then you'll go to the page number, and you'll click on the insert the page number, and then you'll type in the little part there.
So just wondering, normally when you like go to the top and click running header, does it already make it 1 inch, or do you have to physically adjust it?
Sometimes you have to adjust it. Most of the
Okay.
time it's set, but every once in a while you do have to go in there and double up and stuff. And so when you get stuck, on that, you can always come in. I'm more than happy to take a look at it. But the reason why it's important to use the header is because if you don't, now you can have it you can set it where it'll. You can have it where it doesn't show the first page, or it does show the first page and then it doesn't show the second one. I mean, you can go in there and make modifications where adjust it the way you want it, the way it's supposed to line up. But the reason why it's important is because if you don't put it in with the header up there, when you start going to the next page, you have to go in there physically. But if you make any edits to your paper, it throws everything off. With that, if you do it manually with that header. Because if it makes, let's say you're working on your second page, you're typing in there, and then, you go to your third page and fourth page, and then you go back and add stuff, it's going to change everything slightly. So it's going to throw it off. So you have to go back, if you do it manually, and you have to adjust it every single time you make a change. And so, or your spacing will be off. And most professors can tell. I mean, they can tell if you've done it manually, because if you do it with, the header part, that part never moves. No matter what you do on every page, it stays in that location. So it actually makes your life a little bit easier. It's just getting it set up to begin with. And so if you get stuck, let me know. I mean, sometimes it's trial and error. You got to play around with it a little bit. But normally you just go into the header and you can set, type your stuff and go from there. It's generally not too difficult, but if you do get stuck, let me know. I can easily help you with that. And then you see, the title, the class and so forth is down here. Now, I've had some professors that want me to have my class information in the middle. So it just depends on the professor. And so, but most of the time they want it towards the bottom. Your name, class, professor, and then the date. So there's generally 3 parts. So that's what I would say is what I'd be thinking about when it comes to this page. The header. Of course, what the title of your paper is going to be, and then your class information down there. That's what you'll see through the most part. But professors will change it slightly every once in a while, which can be a little annoying. Okay, so let's take a look at the in-text citation, because this is probably something that most students have struggled with, the in-text citation. And so I try to talk about what you need. So when it comes to APA specifically, and I try to show the example here of the in-text citation. So the first thing, you've got to have the author's name, last name. I mean, that's pretty standard. You even see that with the MLA. Now, some of the difference is what do you see here? This little thing right here, a comma. That is different from MLA. You don't see. So you see, you have last name, comma, then the year of publication. That is also different from MLA. APA has the year of publication. So that's how I know this is APA, just by seeing that, because I see that in year of publication. And then comma, and then another thing, what do you see there? Page number, and it says P, period, and then, the page number itself. That is also how I know that it's, APA, because I see that little P there. In MLA, you don't do that. You do, parentheses, Smith, space, and then 46, we'll say. And then you close, the parentheses there. So this is how I can tell that it's different. So when you're using in-text citation, there are typically 3 things that you have to have: last name, year of publication, and then the page number. Yes?
I always got confused. When we did in high school, so say that you insert your quote or whatever, do a period go at the end of the quote and then at the end of the citation, or the period goes at the end of the citation?
It's a good question. I'm going to normally it goes after, but there are some exceptions, and I'm going to show you those as well. Because like we're going to go a little bit more in detail on the in-text citation, but I'm going to show you several examples of how you can cite it. Because one of the things that I see with a lot of students when they write their papers, once they learn how to do a certain thing, they do that throughout the entire paper. And a lot of professors don't like that. They like you to mix it up and try, there's different styles at how you can do it. And they like it that you can do multiple styles of it, because it shows you that, or shows them that you know how to really do MLA. Or APA and MLA. So I'm going to show you the difference here in just a second. And so, but that is a great question. Most of the time, the period's on the outside. Most of the time. And so, but does everyone feel comfortable with, knowing that it's, last name, comma, year of publication, comma, and then P period, and then whatever the page number is?
What if I
okay
had a
with that?
professor who was bringing up, like, if you have a paragraph form, and she was like telling us to do the last name, the year, and then she's like, paragraph, and I'm like, you just wouldn't write paragraph in a parenthesis, so how would you do that if that makes sense?
I'm going to show you some examples here. Yep, there are a lot of different ones. And so, all right, let's get into it. Okay, so here are some examples of the different ways that you can cite. So, short quotes. And I can tell you the majority of students, they're going to use short quotes. They're not going to use what we call block quotes, which are a lot longer. And so, which we're going to show you. I'm going to show you how to do that as well. But short quotes is probably the most common, and that means you are simply taking a short little passage, that's in, something that you read in an article, maybe a sentence or two, if that, and then you're quoting that, And so that is probably the most common. So, for example, there's different ways you can write it. So this shows you that they can start off by saying, according to whoever the author is, we'll say Jones, but according to Jones, and then they have, you see, the parenthesis, and then the year of publication, 1998. And then they have the quotation, and then they end it with, P, 199, close parentheses, and then the period. And now the reason why they were able to do that was because, one, they have the author's name, in the sentence that they're using the quote. That's why they don't have to put it in there. And they're also putting the year of publication. This is a good way to, when you're writing your papers, to do that. Now, you shouldn't do that throughout your entire paper, but that is one example right there. And so because they are using the author's last name and the year of publication up there towards the top, that is why you only have to use the page number to end, the citation part there. So the other one is Jones, and then of course 98, found, and then the quote. And then, they have the end of the quote there, and so they put the page number, of course, but they're not done with that sentence, because then they're kind of posing a question there. So that's why you see they close the quotation, they put that there, semicolon, and then kind of pose that question there.
I don't know why is that when you end it with a quotation and they page number, you just put a period at the end. I've always done that. I've never continued.
Yeah, it's different. It's so yeah. I mean, this is. So, and then the last one, this tends to be one of the most common ones, or at least pretty common. She stated, now because we didn't say who the author was, that's why we have to put it in here. So she states, and then of course the quote, and then you in the quotation, of course parentheses, Jones, comma, 1998, comma, and then P period 199, close there, and then a comma, but she, and then, you know, because they're explaining it a little bit. I do this quite often. This is kind of my preferred way. I like that, you know, quite a bit. Yeah, so the idea, I would say, is it's good to try all three. You know, I can tell you from experience, if you try all three, and you're, you know, consistent and able to do that, and feel comfortable with that, your professors, they're going to notice the difference. You know, and I also think your grade will probably end up being higher as a result, because you are going to be able to show them that you know how to use in-text citations multiple different ways. They like that. And also it creates a better flow for your paper, because you're not, like imagine if I use, every time I use a quote, I said according to Jones, or whatever it was. According to Smith, according to Smith, according to Smith. I mean, it doesn't create a good flow of your paper. You know, but by mixing this up kind of throughout, it's gonna have a better flow in your paper. And so, now have they even showed you any of these differences, you know, in your classes? So Squirrel, I know that they're saying yes. What have they showed you?
The last one. with
Yeah.
Jones.
Yeah, which this one's very, you know, very, very common. And so, and it's going to take practice, you know, doing this. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. You know, that's why, you know, you have your, you know, these copies. You know, and the Purdue OWL, you see them, they cite in different ways, you know, the citations part as well. That's why I think that sample paper is always great, because when in doubt, you can always go back and kind of compare your paper, structure-wise especially, to that Purdue OWL sample paper, you know, and make sure that it's lining up the way it's supposed to and stuff. So let's go to the next one real fast, and we'll take a look. So the long quote, which is, you know, you generally don't want to use long quotes a lot. You know, this is something that I remember when I was in graduate school, and I was talking to my professor, and I was asking, how many long quotes are acceptable to you? Because every professor's different on how many long quotes. Some people don't like long quotes because they feel like you're cheating in a way, because you're filling in space. You know?
I do that.
That's the whole purpose.
Yeah.
No.
I really did that.
I do that.
Fillers.
Oh, I have done it myself. You know, it's, you know, because in grad school, you know, our papers, we had to write, you know, consistently 20 to 25 page papers. You know, that's a lot, you know, to have to try to fill in. And so I like the long quotes. The problem is that the professor didn't like the long quotes that much. So normally they say, now this was his standard, now it doesn't mean it's the standard, but he would say, depends on how long your paper is. It will depend on how many long quotes you can use. He says anything under 10 pages, 1. Yes. Yeah, anything that is under 10 pages.
Okay,
Yep.
I'll give an exceptional.
So anything that is under a 10-page paper, you should only use 1 long quote. If I was going to write 20, which is typically our standard, what we have to do 20, 25, 2. Yeah, that's it. You know, because he says, I don't care about, you know, what they are saying. I care about what you are saying and how you are interpreting the information. And so that's why. Now he says, now if it's critical, you know, that's a part of also why you should, when you should have a long quote. It should be very critical, relevant information that you have to present, that you need to have this content in order to make your point. He says, now if you're just doing it because it sounds kind of good and it feels fake, no. He doesn't want you doing that. So, but normally, yes, if most of your papers, you should only have 1, basically. You know. Now that doesn't mean that is set in stone. I mean, your professor may allow slightly more than that. You know, but you have to be careful. You know, because if you decide you're ever going to go to grad school one day, you know, it's better just to get in these habits now. You know, so that way you're not trying to relearn how to write all over again. You know, in grad school. And I can tell you, you know, in grad school, you know, like there's a lot of things I didn't know that I kind of had to just learn quick. You know, and they were not the type of professors that generally like to help you a lot. I mean, I went to a really big university, it was OU. I mean, they expect you to know it. If you don't know it, well, you're going to do bad. You know, I mean, and so it was one of those things you had to seek help elsewhere, essentially. Now, some professors were better than others, and they would work with you, but, you know, they kind of expect you just to know this stuff, and so, which is not fun. And so, but your long quote. So let's take a look at, you know, what you need for your long quote. 1, it needs to be around 40 words or more. So when you're trying to decide how long should I have, you know, what's the definition of a long quote? It should be, at least for APA, is there 40 words or more. And so now, you know, in MLA, it's a little different. They go off about how many sentences you have, you know. And And so normally you start getting into that like, fourth, type, third, fourth sentence, you're starting to get into, what we call the block quote. That's essentially what this is. And so the block quote, the difference. Okay, so a block quote, the things that you need to know is one, eventually you tab it. So it's all shifted over. I mean, obviously you don't see that on this, but when you are, with your paper, you actually have to shift the entire, block, this paragraph, over. So it's, it stands out for itself. So like when you are on, so you're starting this paragraph here, you're going to hit the tab button here, which will tab it over, which is basically the indent. But then you have to indent that second sentence right there. And then it pushes everything over once. How many of us have done that before?
Half an hour spell.
Okay, at the very end of, when we cover this today, I'll go in there and I'll just type in something to show you the example of it there. And so, okay, another thing is when you are using a long quote, block quote, whatever, you don't use, quotation marks because you're indenting everything. So that's why you don't have to use quotations. So, and it goes back to one of the things you were asking earlier. Look at where the period is. It's inside. That is when when you use block quotes, the period goes inside, not outside. So almost 9 out of 10 times it's going to go on the outside, except for when you use the block quote. Then it goes in the inside. Yes.
You know how some quotes have like typos in there, if it's like word of mouth and somebody like typing exactly what they're saying.
Yep.
And you know how you kind of go in there and like not edit the quote, but you could, if I'm saying it right, I think I learned in high school, like you could go in there and put like, not parentheses, but some type of, something to acknowledge that you had added like a word or something, because whoever was doing it like made a mistake. Is that allowed in APA?
Typically what I have done in those situations is, because I've asked professors about this, because there were some articles I read that I thought, yeah, this doesn't sound good what I'm putting in there. And so I've had a couple professors. One professor would tell me, don't care, just put exactly what they say. If it's in quotations, I know it's their words, and so if it doesn't sound right, it's not that big a deal because I know it's their words and it's not yours. So it's better, I would say that's the safest way to go. That way there's no doubt. You got quotations, you covered yourself, it doesn't matter. Another thing that I've done in the past is I've taken smaller parts out of the quote. Maybe I've used, and maybe the sentence is not very good, but there's a little small part of it that I really like. So I just shorten that quote and then put that in quotations, and then I go in more depth explaining it.
Do you put like those parentheses?
Yes.
Not parentheses. You know how like if a quote had more to it, but you just took the part out and you put like dot, dot, dot or something?
Yeah, I don't think I've hardly done that. I've maybe done that maybe one time in my life, because one of the things that I've always tried to do, like when I'm working on these papers, I want to make it as easy as possible for me, and so I always ask myself, do I have to have, like anything that I cite or sources I get, I always ask myself, do I really have to have this? That's my first question I always ask. Because I've seen some of the, some things I'm like, you know what, this is going to be horrible to try to cite, and I just look at it, it's not worth my time. I can find another source out there that's easier to cite than have to put myself through that headache of it. And so I always say, always go on the side, of what's easiest, in my opinion. Why make it hard on yourself if you don't have to? Now if it's something that you have, you have to have, you just like, I have to have this, have to have it. Then what I normally do is I try to cite it using my book. I'll try to find the example as closest to it, and then I go to the professor. And then I say, okay, I'm having a little issue on this one. I just want you to double up because I want to make sure I'm not getting it, wrong. And normally I have them look at it. Now, the thing of it is, when you do that, you have to start on these paper early because the due dates come up pretty fast, and so you want to give them enough time. I had a lot of professors say, hey, I'm more than happy to look at your stuff, but don't come to me last minute. And so that's why I work a little extra. And that's why I always do my works cited pages first. Because if I have any issues, I'm having it way early on, and then I can get that fixed or addressed. So that's why I strongly encourage you, before you even write your paper, look at your sources, different things like that, go ahead and cite those first. And what I do, I create my reference page there, but then I just create a separate page just for myself. It doesn't go with my paper, but I do the in-text citations. I create all those, and that way, when I'm working on my paper, I can go up and just copy and paste the text that I've already created, the in-text citation, and put it in there. So you do a little bit more work, on the front end, but it makes your job so much easier, actually when you're writing the paper. Because how many times have you had to stop and figure out how to cite something using in-text citation? As you're with a good flow, you're writing your paper, and then you get to the end there, and you're like, oh yeah, I gotta cite this, and then it's taking forever to find that, and it just kind of ruins that flow of you writing your paper. That's why I do all that stuff ahead of time. So it's just maximizing your time. So do that first. It'll make it so much easier when you're actually writing the paper. Because normally, once I get the citation stuff done, normally I could pump out a 5 or more page paper generally within about 4 hours. 3 or 4 hours, I could do that, because what took me the longest was the citations. Because you kind of have an idea once you've done enough reading and research, you kind of know what you want to talk about. So that's it's really the citations that drags things on forever. And so always do that first. If it was me. Okay, let's take a look at some more examples. Okay, reference page. Now most of you have done this. One of the things that I can tell about APA, why it's a reference page, is, what does it say? References. What does MLA say?
Citation.
Works cited. Yeah, works cited. That's how I know the difference right there. Now, and I can tell you that, Chicago style is different as well. They have what they call a bibliography. I see the difference, with that. So, but when I see references, this is signal to me, that it's APA, but also, you see the publication, so that's one thing that's different. So, alphabetical order by last name, that's a pretty standard. Almost all your, citation stuff is like that. Then so you have the name, you have the year of publication in parentheses. Typically, you have the title that comes afterwards, and then I have, basically either you have the website or the journal, place where you got it from, next, and then, obviously, the pages there. And so what I do, how many of you typically use internet sources? Okay, so if I'm going to use an internet source, the first thing I do when I print it off, I go and look for those items, on the actual paper itself, what that I print off. I like printing off, most people don't, but I like printing off my citations. I like to actually have them physically where I can see them. And so what I do is I grab a piece of paper, we're just going to pretend that this is an internet source. I print off. I go in there and I start identifying where these are at. So first thing I do is I look for the author. And then I on my page that I printed off, I circle the author's name and I put 1. Because I'm putting them in order of what I need to do on my citation. Then I go and look for the year of publication. On the piece of paper, I circled the year of publication. I put 2, because I know that's going to go second. And then I go and look for the actual title, of it. So I look for my title, that I printed off, circle that, and I put 3. And then I go and I look for either the database, if it's an internet source, they'll have a database where it comes from, or if it's online, like if it's a journal or whatever, it'll have, whatever the name of the publication is. Then I put that, and that's 4. And then, I look for, the page numbers, what it goes through. And then I circle that, and that's 5. And if it's an internet source, a lot of times it has, the link you put in there, which is 6. So typically, you're looking for 5 to 6 items for every source. Like when you print something off, you're looking for generally 5 to 6 things. And I just like to circle those and put them in the order that I'm going to have to do it. So that way, when I'm creating my reference page, I get all my internet sources that I printed off, and I go in there and I look at it. I look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and I start typing it all up. And that's typically how I do it. Now, I'm going to show you some easier ways to do that as well, so that way you don't have to necessarily do that. But that just has always worked for me, because it lets me kind of, know my source quite well, have to look and find these locations of it. And so, how many of you have had issues with the reference page? And if you have, what generally bothers you about the reference page?
When you try to indent and you don't indent it right.
Yeah.
Because ain't it it's like control the tab or something?
Yeah.
And me take me to a whole nother tab, and I'm like, wait,
Yep.
world?
It is a pain. That happens to me many times. Sometimes I have to go in there and play around with it a little bit. Like, you have to hit the tab and then enter the tab. But sometimes it'll like space it too much, and then you got a little extra space there. So sometimes what I go in there is I cheat a little bit, and I like copy or I like highlight it, and then I adjust the size just a little bit. Maybe I do 1.5, instead of double space, and then it pops up just enough where it looks like it's actually double spaced. So sometimes I do that, but we'll show you. I'll show you how to do a little bit of that here in a minute. So, but yes, alphabetical order by last name. And then of course you've got to look for generally those 5 to 6 items. So name, year of publication, title, then whatever the database or source that it comes from, and then of course the page numbers, and then the internet side if it requires that. Now one of the things that's a little different, and I'll show you on the next slide here, because now we're going to look at specific examples, of some of the basic formats for books. So you see author's name, year of publication, title of work, and this says, capital letter, also, for the subtitle, and then the publisher. Here's your example of how you would do that. So you've got the authors, year of publication, period, APA guide, that's, obviously the title, and then see the publication there, and then Washington, D.C., then American Psychological Association. So that's one example. But I'm going to show you here in a second one that you will probably use quite often. This is going to be this one. This is online periodicals. This is typically what professors want you to have. I mean, sometimes they can be a little picky when it comes to internet sources, because they'll say, is it credible? So they're generally kind of picky. So you can't just get on the internet, Google something, and expect them to necessarily like that citation. They might, but they might not. So a lot of professors tell you use online journals, and I'm going to show you a place, to use, online journals at. So here are the main items for that. So let's take a look. We got, the author, year of publication, period. You see the title there, right there.